Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Week 4 lecture. We're going to go a little bit shorter this week on this lecture because there are two other videos that I'm going to be posting, and I also know that we went real heavy on the videos last week. I know there were some pretty lengthy videos, and so this week we are going over data. And if I think the videos last week really set a good idea in terms of the differences between quantitative and qualitative methods and approaches to what you're doing for your research projects. Today's lecture is mostly applicable for quantitative studies, right? Because when it comes to quantitative analysis, you're trying to it's all about the numbers, right? That's usually where surveys will get sent out to hundreds of people, and you're trying to gather that type of information, put it into a program. Like there's something called SPSS where you can plug in all of your data, and then it'll shoot out the results for you. Qualitative obviously is a little bit different. You're trying to get the richness versus the big numbers. So you're still looking for a lot of information, but you're doing it in a much different way. So versus a Likert scale on a quantitative quantitative survey, where you have that strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly disagree, right? Someone might ask a question, then you just circle how you feel about that. Instead, you'd have an open-ended question in a qualitative study, where then you are interviewing someone, and then you either record either just audibly, or you can do a video recording of that response, and then you transcribe it, and that's how you're getting that richness of the data. So it's just different on the approaches. There are still some ways that you can get a little bit of the quantitative or not necessarily quantitative, but where you're categorizing your information when it comes to qualitative analysis. Like for me, for example, I'm a big proponent, if you've taken any of my classes, and when we have these final papers, I encourage students to write something that they're passionate about, because that's how I was taught. You're always more willing to put more work into things if you're excited about the topic. So for my dissertation, I kind of took a 180 after thinking I was going to do a particular thing. And instead, I'm real excited about fantasy football. I actually teach the sports leadership course in our program, so I'm really big, particularly into American football. And so I looked at fantasy football, and I first decided, okay, what has been studied, and where is there a lack of data or information or knowledge? So I figured out that no one really had understood what the means of speaking were. My background's in communication, so I really wanted to understand, kind of define what are some of the ways of communicating within fantasy football. So the way I did it was I listened to hours of fantasy football podcasts. From there, I did kind of, looking for like frequency and intensity. What are some of the common words and phrases that are being used by these analysts, right? With these fantasy football analysts, because if they are the people that people in the community are looking towards for information and advice, they're kind of setting the standard of how you communicate within this fantasy football world. And so I had this huge spreadsheet, this Excel spreadsheet of all the way I was categorizing all these different phrases and lumping them into topics and themes. So there is, as you can see, there's absolutely still some ways of categorizing things, even though you're doing a qualitative analysis. So all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So when it comes to the measurement of data, there are four primary ways of doing that, right? There's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Now, when it comes to the nominal level, right, this divides the data into separate categories that can be compared with each other, right? So if you think about buildings, there's residential, commercial, industrial, educational, etc. You think about marital status, right? There's single, married, divorced, separated, widowed, and even that, right? Because when you think about surveys, most people think that researchers are only looking for the data that's in the actual questions that are being asked, but they have to still categorize the top information when you're filling out, like your age and your gender identity and your marital status, right? So instead of putting single or married or separated when it comes to plugging that into SPSS, they're going to attribute a number to it, right? So 1 might be for single, 2 is married, 3 is separated, 4 is divorced, 5 is widowed. And then from there, it becomes much easier to plug that into a number processing program like SPSS. When it comes to the nominal level, every category is distinctive and does not overlap with one another. Then there's the ordinal level, right? So this puts the data into order with regard to a particular property, right? So it could be size, placing in a race, whether it's first, second, or third, income, something along those lines. Then we have the interval level, right? So data must be measured precisely on a regular scale of some sort without there being a meaningful zero. There might be a zero in one particular way of measuring it, but it might not be the same if you're looking at it in different categories. One example of that is like temperature scale. A zero in Fahrenheit is going to be different than it is in Celsius, but there is still like the freezing, the boiling points, things like that. Think about calendars and like that Likert scale, right? Whether it's strongly disagree, or neutral, which is that's a zero for that. It's not necessarily a meaningful zero, right? There's no way of necessarily measuring that, but there is some sort of zero there. And then we have the ratio level, right? This is the most complete level of measurement. It has a true zero, right? It is the point where the value is truly equal to naught. So we have time, distance, velocity, mass. Those are all measurements that have an actual true zero to them. So when it comes to having like a data cheat sheet, this could be really helpful for you all when it comes to if you decide you want to do something like a quantitative analysis for your final paper proposal. This last one might be helpful, right? So if you're trying to determine one value is different from another, that's going to be the nominal level. If you're looking at one value is bigger or better or more of anything than the other, that's going to be the ordinal scale. If you're looking for one value is so many units, whether it's degrees, inches, etc., more or less than another, then that's going to be the interval scale. And if you're looking at one value is so many times as big or bright or tall or heavy as another, then you're looking for the ratio scale. So again, this is typically better suited for a quantitative analysis or survey or approach to research, depending on what you're trying to measure or determine or find correlation with. But like in the example that I gave you, there is still some way of categorizing things when you're doing a qualitative research project. So that's the lecture for this week. Please make sure you watch the other 2 videos that I post this week on Blackboard.